There's a grain that feeds more people per acre than wheat, rice, or corn combined. It grows where other crops fail. It requires no fertilizer, no pesticides, no irrigation systems. It actually improves soil while it grows, leaving the ground richer than before. Every traditional farming community on Earth once cultivated this grain as their foundation crop. Agricultural textbooks from the 1800s called it essential for food security. Then something strange happened. In less than 50 years, this grain vanished from Western agriculture so completely that most farmers today have never heard of it. It didn't disappear because it stopped working. It didn't disappear because something better came along. This was deliberate erasure. A grain that could feed the world without industrial inputs threatened every part of the modern food system. Seed companies lose customers who save their own seeds year after year. Fertilizer companies lose customers who don't need synthetic nitrogen. The entire model of industrial agriculture collapses when farmers discover crops that work better without chemicals. This is the story of the grain that outperforms everything we're told to plant, and why they buried it so deeply you forgot it ever existed. Welcome to Forgotten Harvests. If you want to understand what agricultural knowledge has been hidden from you, stay until the end. Let me take you back to 1923, rural Indiana. My great-grandfather stands in a field of grain that reaches his chest. The stalks are thick, sturdy, covered in seed heads so heavy they bend under their own weight. This isn't corn, this isn't wheat. The grain is small, round, about the size of quinoa, but darker, almost black when fully mature. "What are you growing?" a visiting agricultural extension agent asks. "Buckwheat," my great-grandfather replies. "Same as my father and his father before him. Grows anywhere, feeds everyone, improves the soil. Best crop we've got." The agent nods politely but makes notes in his ledger. Within 10 years, and that same extension office would be recommending hybrid corn and synthetic fertilizers. Within 20 years, they would tell farmers that buckwheat was old-fashioned, inefficient, not worth growing. Within 30 years, buckwheat had nearly vanished from American agriculture. But here's what they didn't tell those farmers. Buckwheat produces more protein per acre than soybeans. It produces more calories per acre than rice in many conditions. It grows in soil too poor for other grains. It actually creates fertility, pulling phosphorus from deep in the soil and leaving it available for the next crop. It grows so fast you can plant it after other crops fail and still harvest before frost. The plant I'm describing is Phagopyrum esculentum, common buckwheat, though it's not actually wheat at all. It's more closely related to rhubarb. Don't let that confuse you. For over 1,000 years, buckwheat was one of humanity's most reliable grains. In medieval Europe, buckwheat saved communities from famine when other crops failed. In Japan, buckwheat became soba noodles, a cultural staple. In Russia, buckwheat kasha fed entire populations through long winters. American colonists grew it extensively. By the 1800s, buckwheat was America's fourth most important grain crop, grown on millions of acres from Maine to Georgia. The grain itself is triangular, about the size of a small sunflower seed. When hulled, it reveals white flesh that can be ground into flour, cooked like rice, or eaten as porridge. The flavor is distinctive, nutty, slightly earthy. Not everyone likes it at first, but those who grew up eating it describe it as deeply satisfying, filling in a way that other grains aren't. Nutritionally, buckwheat puts modern grains to shame. It's a complete protein, containing all essential amino acids. It's rich in lysine, the amino acid that's typically limiting in plant-based diets. It contains rutin, a compound that strengthens blood vessels. It has a low glycemic index, making it better for blood sugar control than wheat or rice. But here's the remarkable thing about growing buckwheat. The plant is almost ridiculously easy to cultivate. It germinates in cool soil when other crops won't sprout. It grows rapidly, often flowering within 6 weeks of planting. It tolerates frost, drought, and poor soil conditions. It requires no fertilizer because it actually creates its own fertility through its extensive root system. So if this grain is so productive, so nutritious, so easy to grow, why did it disappear from Western agriculture? The answer reveals uncomfortable truths about how our food system really works. The first factor was mechanization. As farms grew larger and more mechanized, buckwheat's small variable seeds didn't work well with the new harvesting equipment designed for uniform grains like wheat and corn. The triangular seeds were harder to clean and process with industrial machinery. The second factor was the development of synthetic fertilizers. Buckwheat's greatest advantage was its ability to grow without added fertility. But when cheap nitrogen fertilizer became available, crops that responded well to heavy fertilization became more profitable. Corn and wheat yields increased dramatically with synthetic inputs, while buckwheat yields remained steady. But there's a deeper reason buckwheat disappeared, one that agricultural historians rarely discuss openly. Buckwheat made farmers too independent. You couldn't patent buckwheat varieties the way you could hybrid corn. Farmers saved their own seed year after year. The grain grew without expensive inputs, thrived without technical expertise, and provided complete nutrition without processing. A farmer who grew buckwheat didn't need to buy seeds every year. didn't need to buy fertilizer, didn't need to buy pesticides, didn't need to buy feed for livestock because buckwheat straw and grain could feed animals. This independence threatened the emerging agricultural industry that depended on farmers buying inputs every season. The campaign against buckwheat wasn't announced with fanfare. It happened quietly, through changes in agricultural education, research funding, and extension recommendations. Buckwheat varieties weren't maintained or improved while corn and wheat received massive investment. Agricultural colleges stopped teaching buckwheat cultivation. Extension agents stopped recommending it. Within one generation, the knowledge of how to grow, harvest, and use buckwheat was largely lost in North America and much of Europe. Farmers who had grown it for centuries switched to industrial crops that required annual purchases of seeds, fertilizers, and chemicals. This pattern repeated with dozens of traditional crops. Farmers became dependent on industrial inputs instead of working with crops that created their own fertility and required minimal inputs. The food system shifted from diversity to monoculture, from independence to dependence. But buckwheat didn't disappear everywhere. In parts of Eastern Europe, Asia, and small pockets of North America, farmers continued growing it. The grain survived, waiting to be rediscovered. Today, that rediscovery is beginning. Small farmers are experimenting with buckwheat again. Health-conscious consumers are seeking out whole grains with complete proteins. Beekeepers are planting buckwheat for late-season nectar. Gardeners are discovering how easy it is to grow their own grain. The cultivation itself is surprisingly simple. Buckwheat can be planted from late spring through midsummer, making it perfect for following early crops or planting where other crops have failed. The seeds need only to be scattered on prepared soil and lightly covered or raked in. Buckwheat grows rapidly in cool, moist conditions. The first true leaves appear within a week. The plants branch extensively, creating a dense canopy that shades out weeds. Small white flowers begin appearing within 35-45 days and continue for several weeks. The grain is ready to harvest when the first seeds have turned dark brown or black and easily fall from the plant when shaken. This typically occurs 70-80 days after planting. Unlike wheat or corn, buckwheat doesn't ripen all at once, so timing the harvest requires judgment. For small plots, buckwheat can be harvested by hand, cutting the stalks when the first seeds are mature and allowing the crop to finish ripening in bundles. For larger areas, it can be combined, though the timing is more critical since the seeds shatter easily when fully mature. After harvest, the grain needs to be cleaned to remove chaff and debris. The dark hulls can be removed with a small grain mill or left on for storage. Hulled buckwheat, known as buckwheat groats, can be ground into flour, cooked as a porridge, or used like rice in various dishes. The nutritional density of fresh buckwheat is remarkable. A cup of cooked buckwheat groats provides about 22 grams of protein, all essential amino acids, significant amounts of magnesium, phosphorus, and B vitamins, plus the vascular strengthening compound rutin that's rare in other foods. But beyond nutrition, growing your own buckwheat represents something more significant. It's a step away from dependence on industrial agriculture toward food security that you control. It's grain production that improves rather than depletes the soil. It's farming that works with natural systems rather than against them. The remarkable thing about buckwheat is how it reveals the false choices we've been given. We're told we must choose between high yields and environmental sustainability. Buckwheat provides both. We're told we must choose between easy cultivation and complete nutrition. Buckwheat provides both. Every garden that grows buckwheat is a quiet rebellion against the industrial food system. Every harvest of grain that was grown without synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, or purchased seeds demonstrates that the old ways still work. Often, they work better. The grain that disappeared wasn't inferior to what replaced it. It was inconvenient for an industry built on selling inputs to farmers. It made people too self-reliant, too independent, too capable of feeding themselves without participating in the industrial system. Now you know what they didn't want you to know. Buckwheat still exists. The seeds are available from specialty suppliers and seed-saving organizations. The knowledge of how to grow it has been preserved by those who refuse to abandon traditional methods. This isn't just about grain. This is about remembering that alternatives exist to every aspect of industrial agriculture. Crops that build soil instead of depleting it. Plants that provide complete nutrition without processing. Farming methods that increase rather than destroy biodiversity. The choice is yours. Start small. Try 100 square feet. Learn how buckwheat grows in your conditions. Taste grain that you harvested yourself. Watch how it attracts beneficial insects. Notice how it improves your soil for the next crop. The grain that feeds more people per acre than the crops we're told to plant has been waiting patiently for farmers and gardeners to rediscover it. The question isn't whether buckwheat works. The question is whether you're ready to step away from industrial dependence toward genuine food security.